I think it's a good way to wrap up by reminding us that when we're talking about infrastructure, whether it is pipelines, whether it is hydro, whether it is what we're doing with our smart grid, at the end of the day, is an opportunity for us to create good jobs. I think if there has been a common thread throughout the testimony that we've heard, it is that the regulatory process is one that unfortunately can yield uncertainty, can yield delays, and that adds to costs. So I want to direct my questions in that vein this morning. Let me begin with you, Mr. Copeland, and then I'll incorporate Mr. Leahy in this as well. When we're talking about small projects, you mentioned the possibility for Crater Lake there in Cordova. What barriers do you have in front of you as you work to develop a small-scale hydro facility in your community? And how can Cordova move forward more readily, more quickly with this from a regulatory perspective? If we could clear things out of the way, what would it be?
I'm going to give you a little longer answer. Our utility co-chair co-chaired the state utility organization, and in general, the biggest barrier is regulatory to developing any renewable. Fortunately for us, in this case, we broke down the biggest barrier by getting the site declared by FERC as non-jurisdictional. So that gives us the opportunity to frankly, develop this as an agile project and a team that can work together through the finish line. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing it. We literally had been told by the Forest Service that it was on their land, and so we hadn't even considered this project until we found out it was private property.
Yeah, which made all the difference in the world.
Yep, go or no go.
Yeah. Let me ask you, Mr. Leahy, when you provided your testimony, you talked about the fact that only 3% of the existing dams out there are actually electrified. And when we think about opportunities, it's not like we need to go out and build a brand new dam here. We have an opportunity to really do so much more with what we have in place. Now, I understand that FERC and the Corps have entered into an MOU to facilitate the development of these non-powered dams. Do you think that those MOUs are sufficient? Is there more that we can be doing here in Congress to help facilitate the electrification aspect?
Sure. We believe that the MOU is going to be a step in the right direction and will solve some of the problems, but the problem is generalized for hydro licensing. While FERC is the issuance of the license, the issuer of the license, they are not the only ones who are involved. There are many state, federal resource agency approvals that are needed in order to get the final approval done. And we believe all of those are important and are part of the process, but they're all independent authorities. And so it's very hard to enforce timelines. It's very hard to provide that certainty, either in a relicensing of an existing project or a new project going forward. With respect to non-powered dams and the core facilities, I also think there could be some additional work that could be done within the core itself in streamlining some of its approval procedures to make that internal work that they do, as well as the external work in coordination with the Corps, much more coordinated.
Well, we'd like to work with you on just defining and outlining that. The reality that the hydro sector is facing right now, not only with the licensing of a new dam, but the relicensing of existing facilities is something that just most people would say is mind-boggling. 10 years and millions of dollars for a relicensing. Now you compare this with a natural gas plant developer who can move through this regulatory process in a couple years. Why is it that when it comes to hydro, the regulatory process is so much more difficult And then the bigger question is what can we do to address it?
Right. Well, again, as I talked about, there are so many different agencies and statutes that are involved in the relicensing of the project because water is a public resource and many interests are involved in the use of that water, and rightfully so that those people are involved. Again, however, coordinating all of that and the meetings and the studies and the information that has to be put together to do that kind of work takes a lot of time and cost. And if, as Clay mentioned, if people aren't all sort of rowing in the same direction, then you can see delays in the process. And so
Delays and then costs.
and then
of course.
additional costs.
Yeah.
And again, how that lines up with tax credits that have short-term extensions that we've seen in a process that could take 5, 10 years or longer provides no certainty to utilities, developers, or investors.
It's absolutely something we've got to work on.